Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous video, we looked at what database mirroring is, and I went over some of the academics associated with the technology called database mirroring. We also looked at some of the comparison of the older technology called log shipping, and we did a comparison of then the pros and cons of each technology. We basically said that what database mirroring is basically taking, going to the principal database, making a full and transaction log backup, and then restoring that transaction log and backup to a mirrored server with no recovery state. This allows you to communicate between the principal and the mirror server using what's called endpoints. And we talked about what's asynchronous and synchronous mode is, and we'll be talking about that in a second. The steps that we're going to be doing is as follows. So we're going to be going through this step-by-step process on a single machine. Now note, I'm not using the domain environment here because that requires a little more setup, and I want to answer some of the questions that students have been asking me, and that is, can you do database mirroring on a single machine? Now, in a production environment, we do not recommend this. This is strictly for demonstration purposes because it's slightly easier to set up database mirroring on a single machine than to have a environment where we'll be doing it in a domain. But for our purposes, this is fine. And it's going to be answering the question, can you do database mirroring on a single machine? Now, remember, the whole premise of HA Solutions is that you have separate servers in separate locations, and you have redundancies of the database. So if one server and database crashes, then if for example, if one database crashes here, we have a redundant copy in a separate location in a separate box. Obviously, if we have two copies of SQL server here, as we're going to demonstrate, and if this server were to go down, or if the database were to go down, then the whole process is eliminated, and we don't have redundant copies of the SQL database. So this is not a good strategy to employ. I'm only doing it for demonstration purposes. In a production environment, again, you have two separate servers when you do database mirroring. But again, for our purposes, we're fine. So these are the steps that I'm going to be taking, and we'll be following them one by one. So what I need you to do is start up SQL. So let's begin and get into the process of starting. So I want you to go to your instance on your desktop and just double click your icon, and this will start up obviously the 2014. Now, one thing you'll notice here is this is the instance I have. And remember, an instance is a self-contained SQL application. So on my desktop, I install SQL 2014, and it was automatically called this. In order for me to get to the second instance or the second SQL server, I installed SQL Server again, the whole process again, and I named it Dev. You will have a choice of naming it. I just named it Dev. That's why you have two separate instances. So on this physical machine, one physical machine, I have two separate instances of SQL. The first one I installed, and it was this. Then when I installed it again, I named it Dev, and this is it. So the first thing I want you to do is to connect to the first instance, and we'll call this our principal. And then I want you to go to Connect, Database Engine, and now select the second one. You'll have to obviously install this second one. So once you do that, we have two instances. So this whole process, I'm going to set up database mirroring using a GUI with no SQL scripts. We'll be doing that in the next video. So if you go to the databases here and expand it, if you go to database here, expand it, you'll notice one thing here, that I do have log shipping going on with the previous videos that we had. So you can combine log shipping technologies with database mirroring. That's why I left it. Usually I like to take everything away to make it simpler to view, but I wanted you to see that you can combine technologies of log shipping and database mirroring and always on solutions all at once. So this is being log shipped to this. But one thing you'll notice here, I don't have a database to database mirror. So the first thing I'm going to do obviously is, rather than selecting it, I'm going to create a database. Go to New Database, and I'm just going to call it Mirror. You can call it whatever you want, but we'll just call it Mirror. And go OK. And once we do that, we've got a database that we can work against. In that database now, let's refresh it. In that database, I want you to create a table. Right-click, New, Table, and you just go X and save. And we can just call it Table 1, that's fine. So we just have, we're just emulating data in this particular mirror database. So now you can see that table here. So the next thing I want you to do, so let's look at our, so first connect to first and second instances of SQL Server on a single machine. We did that. Create a database. We did that. And then I want you to do this. Go to Securities, Logins, right-click, Entity Authority System, Properties, and choose the various configuration. So the reason I'm doing that is that we have proper configuration and rights to that database. So let's go back to here. And this is what I mean. Go to Securities, go to Logins, and you see these are the logins. The logins that I want that's associated with database mirroring on a single machine is NT Authority System. Now, obviously, in a domain environment, you will create a domain user and give it appropriate rights to access this server, access the mirror server, and the SQL agent. And we've talked about permissions there. So right-click, go to Properties, go to Server Role, and I've already given it sysadmin, and that's fine. Go to User Mapping, and look at the database we want to mirror, and this is mirror, and I want you to make a database owner, and go OK. So this, we don't have to worry about permissions. This is all the permissions that we need. So now that we've done that, let's see what we need to do next. So this is what I mean by the appropriate configuration. On the principal server, back up the database and the transaction log to a shared folder. So let's do that. Now remember, we talked about what a shared folder is, now to create a shared folder in the previous videos. So what I want you to do is go to your driver C, create a folder, right-click, go New Folder, and call it Mirror. And there it is. And then what I want you to do is go right-click, Share With, Specific People, and just go Owner. And obviously mine is I've got permissions as an owner, so that's fine. And when you click Share, that's fine. If you right-click, go to Properties, go to Sharing, you'll see that this is being indeed shared. And since this is a single box and the NT system is a authority on all this, it's going to access this database, this folder by default. That's why we chose that logging, because that logging is going to run our database mirroring. So now that we've shared this fine, we're good. So let's close this. So let's see what our next thing is to do. So the next thing to do is on the principal server, back up the database and the transaction log to this shared folder that we just created. So let's continue. So expand the database, right-click Mirror, go Tasks, Backup, and obviously we're going to direct it to that shared folder. And obviously this we've talked about relatively, so you should be comfortable in backing up databases. So select the shared folder mirror, and we'll call it full back, BAK extension. Go OK, and that will back up the database, and go OK, and that's backed up. Now we want to do the same thing, but this time we want to back up the transactional log because we do need that for restoring. So Tasks, Backup, and in this case select transactional log from the drop-down. We'll leave it into the same directory and go OK, and that should just take a second. And now if we go to the shared directory and double-click it, you'll see that I've got full backup. Let's get rid of this one actually so we don't confuse it. That's the one I just took that has both. Now, what's the next thing we've done? Oops. Go to the mirror server and restore the database with no recovery mode and change directory. So let's do that now. So here, this is a separate instance. So here, if I refresh, you'll see I don't have a database called mirror. So I have to restore that database called mirror. So right-click database, restore database. And now let's direct ourselves to that backup. Click here, add. Now obviously navigate to that shared directory. That's why it's important to have that share, because both instances need to access it. And there it is. Go click. OK. OK. And you'll see I have both the full database backup and then the transactional log backup. There's a couple of things here we need to do to make sure. Now, if I go to Files, and if I expand this, and if I expand this, you'll notice one thing here. This is the original file, meaning this is the principal, where this is the principal files for the database, and we're restoring it as the same file. If we do the same file in the same file, you're going to get an error. So what we need to do is relocate the files to a different folder, because the second instance is not in this path. It's in this path. See how it changed? Look at the word dev here, and there's no dev here. If I uncheck that, it gives the directory of the first instance, not the second instance. The second instance of SQL is called dev. So I want to relocate it, otherwise we're going to get an error. So make sure you check this box. The other thing I want you to do is click Options and set No Recovery. The database must be in a no recovery state for the incoming transactional log and records to be updated, and go OK. And this will just take a second also. And there we go. So now if we look at it, we'll see the database mirror is restoring, and now we can start the database mirroring. So let's see what we have to do now. Go to the principal and start the database mirroring. So go to the principal, which is this. Now, right-click the database mirroring you want to mirror, in this case mirror, tasks, and go mirror. Let me do one thing here, because I do want to talk about it, and it's already there from the previous example that I gave, so I don't want to confuse you. So let me remove what's called endpoints so we can start from scratch. And remember I said that the whole premise of database mirroring is using what's called endpoints.